All right. Says I'm streaming. We'll see about that. I'm not sure yet. Oh, here we go. Oh, nice. We are. Okay, we are live, guys. Just want to welcome you to the Sportfolio Kings. Brett Matthew is with us on the call. He's in Vegas right now. He's preparing for March Madness, as am I, as are we both. Basically, we have a free lookbook for every team that's in the tournament. So while other people were gallivanting with the time changes, we were working hard and diligently on this stats-based analytics book detailing each team. So we're going to go through that with you through the next 5 days. Today, we're just going to kind of give you an overview of March Madness, um, brackets, what we're looking for, what Brett all his money behind in Vegas. Obviously, not all of his money, being strategic with how we trade and make investments. But yeah, welcome. This is the very first live for Sportfolio. Brett and I have been dabbling in the sports betting arena for almost a decade now. Yeah, decided to kind of open up our own little shop and have a lot of interesting things down the pipeline, especially as we prepare for the rest of March Madness and into the NFL season, which is kind of our bread and butter. Which, hey, follow along and we'll provide plenty of insights and things you can, find actionable insight on. So,
Yeah, and I think that, we'll talk a lot more about what Sportfolio Kings is and what we plan on doing. But let's just jump right in right now for this sake for March Madness. And start talking about our first thoughts. I mean, the bracket was just released a couple hours ago. We barely even kind of had much time to even talk about the matchups specifically here in round one yet, just because we were so busy, putting together this data. And also, just FYI, this is version one of the book. So many people wanted it as soon as possible. So this is kind of version one that we're getting out there. There's still plenty that we want to fill in. So there's some proprietary views that we're going to incorporate. So kind of market signals, kind of strengths, weaknesses, where we think certain teams can go, where we think the value is in particular matchups. But that's going to be, that's not something that we're going to, materialize tonight. We could give you our first initial inclinations, which we can share now, but we're not going to memorialize that and give that out as like actionable feedback to you at this early stage of the game. So that's going to come tomorrow, the next day, and so on. And so we'll have different versions of this playbook out there for you. So we expect probably 3 versions. We'll come out with version 2 maybe tomorrow or the next day, and version 3 probably by Wednesday. So you can have the full kind of broader picture with our views as well in time for you to finalize your brackets by end of day Wednesday, Thursday.
perfect. Well, without further ado, we are live with our book for March Madness. Brett, do you want to kick it off? Page 1 obviously is a little bit of an intro. We'll go to page 2. You can follow us on Twitter. We just have some information there for you. We have a bracket up for you, but let's get to the good stuff. If you go to page 4, Brett, can you talk us through seeking value, Vegas expectations versus public perception?
Yeah, so basically this just breaks down, this is the chart is split into 2 here. So the first 35 or so teams on the left and the next 35 or teams on the right. And basically this just breaks down, this is listed in order of teams with the best odds to the worst odds from a Vegas perspective around who's going to win the championship. And that's based on futures prices. And then if you look over to the 4th, 5th column there, the tournament seed, that's the actual seeding that they've been placed in the bracket by the broader committee. And so what we have here, the most important column, the value versus public perception column, that column just breaks down, all right, what does Vegas think of this team? And what does the committee think of this team. And the committee can also be a proxy for the public, because the public's going to go off these brackets and the bracket rankings. And so what we can see here is just the distinction between Vegas's views and the public's views / the committee's views, and how stark or not are those differences. So we can see, just as an example, Gonzaga, Baylor, Illinois, Michigan, those are all in line. The market thinks those are the 4 best teams. Vegas thinks those are the 4 best teams. So there's no value to be had. They're not overrated. They're not underrated. I mean, they're market neutral. And then we can start to see Houston, Iowa, Alabama. Now, they're a little bit, there's some value there versus the public. The public thinks that those teams aren't as good as Vegas is rating them. One of the teams that we can see the biggest distinctions here is clearly Connecticut, UConn, Georgia Tech, and Michigan State. So essentially what that's saying is Vegas values those teams much more highly than the public is perceiving those teams. So what does that mean for your brackets? That means UConn, you should probably have UConn going a little bit further, because Vegas is much sharper than the public, obviously. And so Vegas is seeing UConn can go multiple rounds, whereas the public probably sees UConn as maybe going 1 round or maybe not any. And so same thing with teams like Georgia Tech, teams like North Carolina, teams like Michigan State, where we see this massive distinction. And then on the other side, we can see teams like USC, teams like Clemson, massively overrated in the public side. Teams like Colorado, massively overrated in the public's eye versus Vegas. So what does that mean? That means fade Colorado, fade USC, fade Clemson, fade VCU, fade USCB. Teams that the public thinks, hey, these teams got a chance. Vegas saying no chance. No chance. So if you're looking for upsets, those are probably some prime candidates there. Also, another team that's sticking out here is Arkansas. Vegas has them as the 17th ranked best team, or at least odds. It's a loose proxy, maybe not the 17th best team, but based on the seedings and the brackets and their pathway to the championship, saying they have the 17th best odds, whereas the committee is seeing them as like the 9th best team in the broader tournament. So a big distinction.
Cool. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, look at this, seeing a team like UConn having better odds than Florida State, I mean, the seeding would suggest that, UConn should be a 2 seed, based on the Vegas numbers.
Yeah, 2, 3. Yeah.
So, if you're getting them at what, I don't remember, what is UConn? Are they, go back
Well,
here.
They're the 26th
7th
seed.
Oh.
So, yeah, they're a 6, 7 seed.
They're what? Alabama's 2,200 at a 2 seed in the same bracket. Connecticut's at 2,800. You got a 4.3% versus 3.4%. That's telling you right there, if you want to, pick up some steam in your brackets, a kind of UConn making it to maybe the Sweet 16 at the least is probably a good pivot from what a lot of people probably do. Because I've even already heard, Brett, I don't know about you, before we go a little further, is, some respected cappers that we follow and whatnot are already talking about a version of, the bracket was put in a way that, everyone's going to have the same 4 teams in the final 4, and it's going to be predictable because of how it's laid out. And it's like, do you have any clue what's been happening this season? We just saw how many tournament long shots win their conference tournament, not to mention COVID taking teams out left and right. So, do you see a scenario like that?
You see these conference tournaments. These are outlier events. This is a trend that's happening. And we kind of saw it all throughout the course of the season as well. And even early, not only did lower seeded teams win their tournaments kind of just ubiquitously across college basketball, both in the big conferences and the small conferences, and especially in the small conferences. But also within these tournaments. Every tournament game was almost like a 1 or 2 point game, or it came down to a final shot or a missed free throw or a tip ball. I mean, all these games were just so incredibly close. And you look at the teams. Some teams have played 30 games, and some teams have played 18 games. You know, it's so hard to, so many teams are just not on the same plane, and it's going to be really hard to handicap for sure. But the one thing you do not want to do is over lever yourself on favorites, because whatever is expected to happen, you're going to have to pay up for something that's expected to happen. Again, if you fade what is expected to happen, you're going to get a much more attractive price. And that's what's going to happen in this tournament. The unexpected things are going to happen in this tournament. That's what actually should be expected, is the unexpected. And it happens all over.
Yeah, even when, to your point, even when there's a clear dominant, 2-loss, 1 through 4 top teams in the brackets, even then, maybe one makes it to the Final Four, two, maybe one makes it to the championship game. So the fact that I've already heard rumblings of, oh man, it's going to be the 4 best teams this year. What a shame. Like, I mean, I don't know, like, based on what? I mean, if anything, I mean, this year seems like there's going to be as much volatility as maybe we've ever seen. So besides, obviously, maybe a Gonzaga who might find their way towards the Final Four with ease, I think everyone else is on the table. Like, I mean, if a 1 seed went down again in the first round, the competition isn't great, I wouldn't be shocked. Like, it's just kind of the nature of this year, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, no, and Gonzaga's done themselves a great service for being so good this year, because I think they have by far the easiest region. So even if they weren't and obviously they've earned that, but they even if they weren't as good as they were this year, I think they would have a pretty easy time getting through this region. But I think they're definitely vulnerable once they're in the Final Four. I don't think, like, some people are thinking like it's Gonzaga or bust, and I mean, I think there's going to be no value picking Gonzaga in your bracket. I mean, then if you pick Gonzaga to win the championship in your bracket, and Gonzaga does win the championship, I mean, again, it's going to come down to basically a few points here or there. And if Gonzaga doesn't win, then you have so much room for flexibility and being wrong or right on various trajectories of certain teams. Yeah. But just that in itself, like, just everyone's going to be just stacked at the top of the standings. So if Gonzaga does win the championship, and everyone has Gonzaga winning the championship, so there's no edge there.
Yeah, so, I do think though that there could be edge on. Let's go off Vegas's numbers. 35% implied odds, 36. So more than a third of your brackets based on Vegas should be Gonzaga winning the championship. So if you want to look at it that way, so if you're someone who does,
No, but I would say
I'm not saying you should. I'm saying
no. Yeah. I'm saying that's maybe. First of all, there's a premium based in that because everyone's betting Gonzaga. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely a premium there. I mean, I've already seen, like, I think the market opened up at like 220. It's already at 180. So, and that seems like really silly to me.
Yeah. But I mean, I think if you had enough.
I think but I just think in brackets, it's going to be 60-70% of the pool is going to have Gonzaga win the championship.
Yeah. I guess that's a better way to look at it, is how many, not the implied probability of who's going to win the championship, but what's the implied probability of the amount of people that are going to have that team winning the championship. So,
and this is going to be the thing too, is I'm looking at this region, and I think Gonzaga's best bet at losing is going to be in the second round.
Really?
So it's going to be, in my opinion, if Oklahoma beats Missouri, I think it's going to be versus Oklahoma, because Oklahoma can get hot. And again, like by no means do I think Oklahoma and Gonzaga are even or that Gonzaga shouldn't be Oklahoma. But I just see when I'm looking at these teams and I'm looking at the volatility of these teams and I'm looking at the best version of them, the best version of Oklahoma can beat Gonzaga.
Yeah. I also think a team like USC, if they made it that far, because they have such a size advantage, if they could dominate the interior, and hit shots in that game, that is a team. Because with Gonzaga specifically, we didn't see much of any Achilles heel much this season. But when you watch that BYU game that happened the other night,
Well,
BYU.
as you talk about this, let's go to the custom signal slide.
Yeah, let's do that. But when I
Because
watched
as
it,
you're talking about this, I know what you're going to say,
yeah,
and the custom signals are going to point this out.
and so when BYU was up 50, 54 points in the first half, and then obviously faded in the second half, and Zags came back, great finish to the game. It was because BYU is not a defensive stalwart type team. So if you had a team that could score in buckets and get stops late, I feel like that could be a potential kryptonite for the Zags. But at least so far, I have 4 more days of digesting a ton of information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, because again, so we're looking at the custom signals here, and basically what these custom signals are is, these themes are not anything unfamiliar to you, but the thing is we use our own factors and then weight those factors the way we think they should be weighted to feed into these themes to produce a custom score that we then rank according to the field. So these are not going to be the same rankings that every other kind of bettor out there is looking at, their favorite stat site or ESPN or BPI or 538 or whatever have you, and kind of the same kind of rankings. And then everyone's incorporating those same rankings into their betting philosophies. These are going to be custom versions. So how are they slightly different? So one, when we're looking at experience, so many other stats kind of categorize experience across a team based on the whole team. So the whole team could have 4 seniors sitting on the bench that never play a minute, and that's going to juice that team's experience, total experience stat. But those seniors literally are immaterial. It's actually overweighting that experience stat. So what we do is, by looking at experiences, we look at only the top contributors to the team, the players that actually mean something to the team. Look at just their experience, and that's one of the how we're feeding in this signal. We also overweight, seniors, of course, juniors, sophomores, and freshmen, and then also look at the top 3 bench players and then see, are they sophomores or juniors or sophomores or freshmen. We also look at the point guard. We think the seniority of the point guard is key to a team's broader level of experience. The point guard, if that point guard is a senior or at least older and more experienced, can really dictate the fluidity of the game and just the broader chemistry, and just really greases the wheels. And if you miss that type of player, the whole team kind of breaks down. And that's really what we saw with Michigan State this year with Cassius Winston. Again, was a senior leader on that team, was really able to dictate. That team had great talent, still has great talent, but they lost their senior point guard, and the team just broke down, didn't have that same leadership, couldn't move the ball the same. So that was that's just one anecdote, but how we use the seniority of the point guard also to be a prime factor in influencing the signal. And then that's just one example, but that's the kind of the themes and the kind of the thinking around how we drive some of these signals. So we have the offensive aggressiveness, defensive aggressiveness, and then also comeback potential, which can help you, influence your live betting strategies around, if a team is down big, what's kind of like the inclination? Do they have the weaponry? Do they have the tools to come back? Well, this signal will help you, provide you with a framework around, influencing your decision around that. And then also height, again, same thing, kind of same philosophy, same approach as experience, when we look at height, we're looking at the contributors to the team. We're not just looking at the height of the overall team as an average. Because again, you can have 3 7-footers and a 6'10" guy on the bench that never play, or who are freshmen and contribute only in a minor way. We're looking at the key contributors. We're looking at the height of the key contributors. So that can really give you, again, cuts through the noise, gives you that real signal. And kind of like we're talking about Gonzaga here, again, they are not a super tall team. They are not a super experienced team. And also their defense is not super aggressive. And also what turns into this as well is also their turnover potential. And they can struggle turning over the ball. So when you see those types of weaknesses, when you face a team, like you mentioned, Zach, like a USC, who is much taller and is very aggressive, that could definitely be a problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so with these general, aggregated, variables, we ended up breaking it down on a kind of per team basis, alphabetical order. So by all means, start at the top, pick your team. And the reason we did this in part,
and not alphabetical order, but in the order, same order as the Vegas expectations versus public perception. Basically, just in the order of of the biggest favorite down to the least favorite.
Oh yeah, for those. Sorry, I was skipping ahead to the team by team
yes, yeah, correct.
Slides. So these slides are the ones that are alphabetical. And yeah, the reason we did this is because, as the tournament progresses, I know there's a lot of excitement for the first round, obviously. But then, there's also a few more weeks of, potential investing or betting, whatever you want to call it. So by all means, you can come back to this and check it out to see, Gonzaga is playing Oklahoma now. So let me see what signals make sense to apply to that game. But if we start at the top with Abilene Christian, we could start there if we want, or we could go to a team that we know a little more about. Should I jump to?
Let's do Alabama.
Alabama? Let's pop to Alabama. Okay, great. First page, Alabama. And there's 2 pages for each team, just for anyone out there who ends up checking the stream out, which looks like there's no one currently, but you may rewatch it. So, hey. Alabama, we have some key stats, stuff you can find anywhere, but we aggregated what's we think is most important to kind of key on. So you have Alabama points, expected field goal, or no, EFG. Which one is that?
It's expected field goal percentage. But the thing is what we have the columns here is, the key stats for Alabama, and then how, their defensive stats, essentially their opponent, and then also the average of the Division I teams. So you can see, it provides you kind of with context around what these numbers actually mean versus an average team.
Yep. And then we move over here. We have some Ken Palm stats we pulled as well, kind of make it easier to aggregate, have those with you.
And then a summary of our custom signal stats. So again, you can see that experience, the aggressiveness, the height, and the comeback potential. And again, we broke it out across the entire field, a few slides ago. But then we have those stats broken out here specifically for you. Also, we break out that experience signal to also talk about returning minutes. How many returning scoring from last year. Again, gives you that average years of experience. And then our custom experience score, and then the rank.
Yep. Very valuable. I dig it a lot. And then also,
and one of the pieces of information here, again, that's empty right now, but that will be populated in the next few days, in the next couple of versions, is our market outlook. What's our broader kind of macro view on this team? What we think kind of like the max upside, max downside of that team is, and the specific strengths and weaknesses. Because again, we know that you'll want this information, not just on a game by game basis, but also just to help you fill out your brackets. So this will help you kind of understand what are the types of teams that could upset other teams down the line as well.
Yeah, perfect. And then the second slide for Alabama, this one's a little more data specific to trend lines. Brett, do you want to walk us through kind of each one of these charts and why they're important? And I'll zoom into each one as we can.
Yeah, so these are definitely going to be for probably your more sophisticated sports bettor who can just help understand, how these teams have performed over history, over the course of the season, how volatile this team is. So we like to use this type of data, especially when it comes to live betting, because we want to understand, okay, this is the opening total or this is the opening spread. And when does that team provide value when it deviates from that spread? So, for instance, and we can see like how often does this team, what's their volatility around the Vegas number, so the Vegas total or the Vegas spread. So kind of like this first one, looking at the spread insights, and we can kind of like go clockwise, but the expected MOV or the spread, which is the expected margin of victory versus the actual margin of victory. So we can see the expected margin of victory is in black, and that's basically saying, well, what's this team's spread over time? And what we can also learn from this is, did Vegas meaningfully adjust their view of this team over time? And we can see Vegas has been relatively on target with this team, kind of having the same kind of perspective. Basically, they're going to be around, a 5 to 10 point favorite, or kind of like a pick 'em. And what we can see here is that, except for a few bumps, it's either Alabama spread, the actual outcome of the game is right on the spread, or it's approximately 10 points off. And so that can provide you with a framework around how to trade this team from a live perspective. When you look at the cover delta versus the opponent rank, basically this just looks at, all right, so the line going from left to right is the opponent rank. So depending on kind of like the strength of the team that they're playing, then how much do they cover by or not versus that team. So we can see they're kind of like a little bit all over the place, but what we can see is that they cover by a lot when they do cover. And if they don't cover, it's still somewhat close to that opening spread. So basically we can see, what we can learn from this chart also is Alabama's played a lot of top 100 teams. We can see those dots are all kind of consolidated to the left there, and not many games to the right, which means they didn't really play many teams that were ranked worse than 100. So they played a lot of top 100 teams. And when they played those top 100 teams, they covered a lot of these games. And when they covered by a lot. They've covered by 30 3 times. They've covered by 20, 1, 2, 3, 4 times. They've covered by in excess of 10, another 4 times. And then there's been maybe another 4 times where it was, right there, maybe 5 times, kind of right there on the spread exactly, which is kind of what that previous chart kind of also implied. And then when it's below that number and you're moving into the negatives, that means they didn't cover. And by how many points did they not cover? Well, it's pretty close to that line. There's none that are kind of like way off the line like it is on the top. So if Alabama doesn't cover, they're at least not getting blown out. They do the blowing out is what this chart says. And so now we can move down to the bottom left one and say cover delta versus the expected MOV, which is the spread. So how much do they cover by relative to the expected kind of margin of victory, which is essentially saying how much do they cover versus the actual spread itself. And so from left to right, we can kind of see what the spread is. So the left would be them being an underdog. And we can see that they were barely ever an underdog. So it looks like 3, unless there's an overlapping dot, it looks like it was like 3, maybe 4 times. To the right is when they were a favorite, and it looks like they're favorited pretty much in every game. And then from up and down is basically saying, all right, well, by how much did they cover in excess of that spread? And so it looks like, to the right, when they're a favorite, they've covered the number by a lot of points, a lot more often than they didn't cover. So when they didn't cover, you can see, again, it's very close to that red line, which means when they didn't cover, it was pretty close to the spread. So they were not losing the spread by a lot. But when they covered the spread, they did actually cover by a lot, several times. It is basically what we're learning from there. So that is a kind of attractive risk-reward proposition when you're betting a team like Alabama. Then it's either when you're bet on the spread, either they're going to cover that spread easily, or it's going to be close.
Well, and to that point, to add on, I believe Alabama's line has already moved 2 to 3 points, from like 21 point favorite to like 23, 24 point favorite already. So that's obviously some sharper money, I think, coming in, realizing that, especially the type of team Bama is, that line was a little low based on the trends that we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and again, what we can see from this chart too is when you looking at this chart, again, to the left means they were an underdog. So a 5-point underdog, 10-point underdog. And then by how much did they cover by those 2 times? When they were a 10-point underdog, they covered by 20, which means they won by 10. When they were a 5-point underdog, they covered by 20, which means they won by 15. So just goes to show, like, when this team is hot, I mean, they're really hot. And then we can see, so what you said, they're a 22-point favorite. So we can look at, they have not been that big of a favorite very often this season. But from this chart, we can see they were basically in excess of 20-point favorite once, and they barely covered. They did cover, but they barely did. As we can see that blue dot, again, to the right of 20, which means they're probably a 21 or 22-point favorite. And they covered just barely over the 0 line, which means they covered by maybe 1 point. And then we can go to the next one, the margin of victory projections. This one's just a helpful one, especially for live trading. Basically what this shows is one standard. So we look at the mean. So look at what's their average spread. So their average spread is the mean expected. So on average, they're a 5.5-point favorite. What do they actually do? So they actually win by 9.5 points. So that just means this is probably a good team to bet on. And then if this team is really clicking, they win by 23 points. If this team is having a bad game, like they're not clicking, they're going to lose by 3 or 4 points. Again, an attractive risk-reward proposition, because even if they're not playing well, the game's going to be relatively close. And if they're hot, they're going to crush the team, is basically what this chart is saying.
I like it. What about totals?
So totals, again, same philosophy of what we just talked about with spreads. It's just now it's totals. So again, expected total versus actual total. The black line is, again, how Vegas priced this team from a total perspective. And we can see it's a relatively flat line. So pretty much every Alabama game has been a total between 140 and 160. That's what this is basically telling us. And what the green line is telling us is the volatility relative to those expectations. So we've seen that, hey, it's dipped down to 120. It's gone up to almost 200. But we see actually it's dipped below expectations a lot. So basically what that's saying is the market expects Alabama to score a lot, or with their opponent, the game's going to be high scoring. And either the game is actually kind of close to being right on that black line, except for a few high bumps, or it drops. So what this tells me is that from a totals perspective, Alabama is the risk reward, the best kind of bet here is either going to be the total is going to be close to what Vegas expects it to be, or it's going to be lower than that. As we can see, it's only jumped up above it really meaningfully twice. And other than that, it's either been very close to it or lower than it. So that would say, again, if you're going to bet this team, especially if the total is moving higher on if you're live trading this team, say the total moves up 10 points from the open, that seems more than enough wiggle room based on this chart, because they've only gone above the total, again, 1, 2, 3 times meaningfully. So if you got so if you have a Vegas total, it's 155, and you get a live line of 165, this chart is telling you bet the under. Bet the under, because Alabama has not blown it out of the water above the expectations from a totals perspective. It more so leans under those expectations. So that's what this chart's telling. Looking at the total delta versus opponent rank, again, same philosophy as the cover, as the spread. This is just looking at the teams that the opponent rank from left to right, and then how have they performed from a totals perspective over expectation. So we can see, what is this mostly telling us? It's, again, a lot of lines, a lot of dots close to the line, which again is consistent with the previous chart, saying they pretty much meet expectations. There's a few lines, again, a lot of consolidation under the total, especially if they're playing a better team. And then a few dots that kind of blow above to the top. So I can see, 2 dots that, are meaningfully higher, but everything else is kind of consolidated around that red line or meaningfully below it. Again, consistent with what I was just saying on the previous chart. This team either plays close to that total or below it. Total delta versus expected total. Again, this is now telling us, it's going to be the same kind of stories, just from different angles. And what this tells us is Alabama's totals are usually above 140 and between 160. And then what do they do in between those totals? Again, it's close to that red line or below. We've had 30 points below expectation. It looks like 6, 7 times, 20 points below, 6, 7 times. So again, tons of games, meaningfully below expectations, 20, 30 points we can see. And if not, then it's kind of close to that red line. And kind of what I was saying before is basically, if you get a live total on Alabama that's in excess of 10 points or more. So again, Alabama, opening total 155, live total 165. All 3 of these charts is telling us bet the under, bet the under, bet the under.
Yeah, and fundamentally, I think you would see that with how Bama plays, which is very streaky. They're very hot when they're hot, and they get very cold when they're cold. So it kind of fits that.
Well, and what this is also saying is that the market expectations of Alabama are always so high that it's like hard to either they meet those expectations because it's such a high bar, or they don't. Much more so than them actually exceeding that high bar. And then lastly, the totals projections. Again, this is the same philosophy is for the spreads. We look at the mean expectation. And again, this is exactly what I was just saying. This proves my point. So the mean expected. What's Vegas's average expectations? The average expectations is for their totals to be 152. What's the actual real result on average? 149. So on average, they're going under that total. If they're going to go super hot, then yeah, they can go above that 152. So if they're just making every single basket, this is a super fast game and they're not playing any defense, it can go to 170. But we can also see below it, they're essentially looking at one standard deviation above and below. The one standard deviation below is 20 points, One standard deviation above is 18 points. And that's basically what the hot and cold is. One standard deviation hot, 18 points, gets you to 170. One standard deviation cold gets you to 131. But again, the one and again, this is much deeper than some people might appreciate. That's why I just trust the charts. But one standard deviation is saying, well, they have a 30% chance of being hot and a 30% chance of being cold. So the odds are the same, but the gap is much wider to the downside, to being cold. It's 20 points. But basically what this is saying is that 20 points has the same probability of happening as the 18 points higher. So again, just it tilts you to the lower. Again, a little bit deeper. Again, these charts are not going to be for everyone, but that's why we have these projections charts that basically just summarizes everything for you. And what this is essentially telling you is especially if you're getting a live bet on Alabama's totals running hot, bet that under because the data says to do so.
I dig it. And then what about this final bar? Some of this is obvious: wins, losses, ATS.
Yeah, some of this is obvious, just stuff that good information for you to know, and also this just kind of summarizes what some of these data points are in these charts. So you have the average expected MOV, again, margin of victory. What's their average spread? Their average spread is 5.5. What's the average reality of how much they win by? It's at 9.8. Volatility, 13.1. So again, it's going to move up or down 13 points on average, or not on average, but within one standard deviation. So you're thinking, 70% of the time that it's going to move 13 points from the opening spread, up or down. Then we look at the overs unders, again, 14, self-explanatory. The minimum expectation, basically, what was the lowest total Alabama's ever been priced at this season? It was 143.
Oh, wow.
What was the actual minimum total? Well, it was 120. What was the maximum total that we've ever seen Alabama priced at? It was 165 this season. And then what was the actual 197? So basically, if you're going to get a hot game, it happens very rarely, is what the charts are selling us. But if it does happen, it's a barn burner. And then again, some average expected totals, average actual total. Again, what's the average Vegas spread, average actual spread, or average total that happens over time? Again, standard deviation. And we can see the standard deviation is quite high. So this team has a lot of volatility.
Nice. I dig it. A lot of good stuff there.
A lot to digest there. Again, not going to be for everyone, but it's definitely some helpful information, especially for those people that want to live trade these games.
Yeah, and like Brett said, we started, if you go down to Appalachian State, some of these started to update our market outlook, strengths, weaknesses. You can do that yourself if you prefer, but basically we just look at the charts and the information and then apply what we think based on what the charts and data is telling us. But yeah, all that sounds good. We don't want to take up too much more of your time now that we've kind of explained the overall kind of booklet, so to speak. We'll post it in our Twitter. We'll post it on our YouTube channel, etc. So feel free to download it when can and kind of use it all March Madness. And we'll be back, tomorrow night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, kind of breaking down each bracket to kind of give you a more detailed, basically what we just did with Alabama, but do it for each team. And that way, if it's easier for you to just kind of follow us, dig into it, then maybe it'll be easier than having to read some of the charts, etc. So yeah, anything else, Brett, you wanted to touch on before we head out?
No, but looking forward to definitely the next few days and breaking down these regions. We've had incredible success with our brackets and the pools that we've entered. Again, our recommendation is, entering the ESPN pools and any sort of sizable pool, anything above, really 300 people. You might as well just put in a bracket that's pretty crazy because that's just going to be your best kind of expected value of actually winning. But really, if you want a really targeted strategic bracket that's going to give you the an increased chance of actually winning, you want to be in a pool that's ideally 100 or less, but definitely 300 or less. And those are the types of pools that we enter. We kind of get in as many as we possibly can, and pretty much year in, year out, we're competitive into the Final Four or into the championship game, and are fighting. We're almost always in the money. I think we've made money in our bracket pools, the last 4 consecutive years, including winning first in a couple of those as well, and are always, again, like in the Final Four or in the championship, competitive for winning our pools outright almost every single year. So one of the reasons why we do that is you can tell that all the preparation that we put into this type of book, I mean, really, this is the type of prep that we do every year. We're just kind of memorializing it and saying, why don't we scale this and actually share this information with some people, as long as they're not entering the same pools as us, I guess.
Or if you got a good pool, let us know. Happy to consider.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, appreciate everyone. We'll be back tomorrow night. We'll start with, I believe, Gonzaga's region, which is the East, I think. Here it is. West. So we'll start with the West tomorrow.
Although they're all in Indianapolis, so.
Yeah, that too. And yeah, catch us tomorrow on YouTube, and yeah, follow us on Twitter if you can to kind of get updates as we provide through March Madness. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to minimize that, and I'm going to do this and go.